Welcome to another segment of the ongoing Kundalini Awakening series. I'm your host, Brent Spirit, and today I'm in conversation with McLean. Aaron, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today on the show.
Brent, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, of course, of course. So as always, I like to introduce my guests to our audience with a brief summary of how we got connected. Interestingly, you had sent me a message on Instagram, and every now and then I get messages from people, but something told me to connect with you further. So we jumped on a call. We shared a little bit about our stories. And of course, one thing led to another. And I was told, get Aaron on the show, get him to share about his journey. There's people out there that need to hear about what you've gone through, some of the challenges you face, the solutions you found, as of course you navigate your spiritual awakening and Kundalini awakening journey. So of course, Aaron's here with us today with quite a bit of Kundalini awakening experience. 5 years, but I like to say for everybody that tells me they've been going through it for a few years, if we look back further enough, we can find that it's been going on for quite a while, quite a while. So something to keep in mind there. Aaron was working in the tech and gaming industry around the time that this really took off for him. And of course, as an entrepreneur, today, Aaron offers coaching to support healing and personal development, supporting people going through their own Kundalini awakening process, drawing upon some of the skills, some of the tools, the insights that he's gained along his journey as an entrepreneur. Aaron's been coaching and facilitating men's work and recovery from addiction for the past 2 decades. And Aaron, we were talking earlier, and I was sharing that, I haven't really had anybody on the show who's been through addiction, who's worked with people dealing with addiction. And so I'm really happy that you're here with us to share some fresh perspectives that haven't really teased out of anyone else before. Personally, my experience with addiction is limited to video games as a teenager, social media. Not to invalidate that, but it's a little bit more lighter than some of the other types of addictions out there. And quite a large segment of the people that I connect with do come and share, hey, I'm struggling with this illness, this addiction to all sorts of things alongside Kundalini awakening process. And it can be very challenging. It can be, of course, very emotional. There can come with a lot of stigma, a lot of personal, browbeating and feeling down and, all the things that come with those challenges. So I'm really happy to see where this conversation goes. This one's for all those out there that they're having a difficult time. So Aaron, tell us a little bit about how this all began for you, the spiritual awakening journey, Kundalini awakening. You can take us as far back as you like. Wherever you'd like to jump in, please, let's unpack this together.
Well, thanks very much, Brent. First, I just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing. I'm grateful to be on the show. I'm grateful to just have some time to spend with you and discuss some of these things and really, seeing the work that you're doing and the awareness you're creating, I think is really important at this time. And so just want to thank you for that. And yeah, I'm happy to take you back. So my, like you said, even though my Kundalini awakening occurred 5 years ago, my actual first experiences with awakening began in, I would say, around the age of 20. And, as you shared about my experience with addiction, I had been suffering from addiction from the time I was about 14 until that time. And I had an experience where it was really, I was sober at the time. I was out at a restaurant. I was relaxing, just having some wings and hanging out with a friend. And I started to notice that my environment was synchronizing in this manner. And the synchronicity continued to deepen over the course of a short period of time until I went into a non-dual state of awareness. And
Interrupt, sorry. Um, a short period of time, meaning within that one outing with a friend or over a few days, weeks?
within like 15 minutes.
Interesting. Okay. Please
Yeah.
go on.
And so as this experience was occurring, the deepening of synchronicity, I was noticing that life was harmonizing in this unified language. And it was very similar to a Neo in the Matrix type of moment where the climax of the experience was a realization that I am life, all of life, in a non-egoic way, but in a deeply interconnected realization. And that set the tone for what I would say was my introduction to Kundalini, was a a phase in my awakening, a stage in my awakening that also introduced me to spiritual emergence and emergency.
Mm.
Because at this time I was also suffering with addiction, and I had quite a bit of trauma that I was working through and had not addressed. And this these powerful energies that emerged, I now refer to this kind of like a Kundalini burst, where it was a first real burst of Kundalini that gave me a lot of energy to integrate. And I didn't have the tools or the emotional stability to really understand how to do that. I knew that I was never going to see the world the same again, or myself. And I went into a period of time where immediately I changed, and I started to express about my experience of all is one, and these teachings which naturally came from the heart. And I deepened in my interest in spirituality greatly. And the emergency side of that was that I still was not balanced, and I was really still using a lot of mind and mood altering substances in a very destructive way. And I actually feel that this experience supported taking me to a place where I was willing to surrender, which happened, I would say, about a year and a half after this. And that year and a half was a dark period in my life, because I was clearly aware that I was meant to let go of this way of living. And I chose to continue on that path because I did not have the tools to properly achieve sobriety.
Right.
And and finally that came to a head where it's very commonly spoken about with people that suffer from addiction, which is a bottom, and I hit a very difficult bottom in my life. And that facilitated me being willing to make the changes that I needed to make in my life. And at that time I was 22 years old, and I took it very seriously. I changed where I was living. I left a friend group. I began to immerse myself in recovery. And that was what I would say, the beginning of my commitment to the path.
Mm.
When we talk about awakening, I believe we're awakening over the course of our entire lives. And there's these different stages of awakening. And I'll speak to my youth. My youth was I was extremely well supported. I came from a beautiful home. I had a lot of love. At 13, my mother passed away. And when she passed away, that marked a very important time in my life, because it was the end of innocence, but also the end of childhood.
Mm.
And then I moved into a very dark period, which was also the natural rebellious exploration of the teenage years, combined with a sense of meaningless and uncertainty and fear and anger and all of these emotions that arise as a result of as I reflect on it now, are my experience of life being threatened, because the experience of my mother passing created a awareness of the volatility of life.
Mm.
And this greatly impacted my spiritual beliefs, because I came from a spiritual upbringing. I was Roman Catholic and was raised and went to church every weekend, and my mother was very, very spiritual. So there was a death of sorts of my spirituality through that process as well. And then the journey, I really believe with addiction, um, addiction is an attempt at a solution for many. And oftentimes there's components of the process of utilizing substances or things outside of ourselves, because addiction can also include sex, it can include food, it can include shopping, and anything that can be really abused as a source of attempting to achieve connection, which can only be achieved through our connection with ourself and life. And so the healing process of healing from addiction is really that process of reestablishment of connection. And that process inevitably takes us through the process of dealing with our trauma. And so at 22, when I got sober, I really went through a big awakening, because not only had I had that non-dual experience several years prior, but I also um, popped my head out of the sand and I was like, wow, I was 13 like last week, and now I'm 22. I don't know who I am. I've never like when I was younger, I was an athlete, this rambunctious kind of guy, and I went so deep down this path with drugs that I just lost my sense of care for really myself. And yeah, there was a reclaiming of um, my values, a reclaiming of my integrity, a very quick maturing process that went on as a result of one, coming into a state of health within my body, because as a result of addiction, I was so sick all the time that when I actually had a day where I was not sick and I was balanced and I was motivated, partly because I just felt behind. I felt like I need to catch up on my life. And so, yeah, I went through a very dead, the script completely flipped, and I went directly into personal development and spiritual development in ferociously. And that journey continued on, and I was blessed. The synchronicities that I spoke about earlier started to really manifest themselves in amazing ways, where the right teachers and supports inevitably just arrived in my life to help to begin my journey of maturing as an adult. And that really has been a holistic journey. And what I mean by that is it's been very practical. Majority of this time, when I reflect on my spiritual path, it was very much about showing up to everyday life, being here, being present, being grounded, um, being of service. And these were many of the principles that I learned through 12-step recovery, which was a core part of this. And I want to speak to that for a moment, because for a lot of people out there that have or are suffering from addiction, there's oftentimes resistance to programs like AA or NA or some of these 12-step recovery programs. And I had this resistance and was very, very much what I call like one toe in and the rest out, because I'm like, I don't subscribe to any cults and this type of thing. But at a certain point, I started to really ask myself a valuable question. And that was, within the realm of recovery from addiction, do the statistics show that this works?
Mm.
And I started to see, okay, so there's this organization that there's millions of people living happy, joyous, and free that were in the depths of addiction. And it's fully self-supporting. So this organization has been run by people recovering from addiction. It's a global organization with millions of people that have found recovery. And so I was like, okay, so that's a data point. And my resistance, I couldn't deny that. So I was like, okay. Then the next thing was I was like, okay, so they ask us to do these things. There's these core four things that they ask us to do. They ask us to get a sponsor. And I was like, okay, well, what is a sponsor? A sponsor is an elder, somebody further along the path in their spiritual development that is both a sounding board and somebody capable of calling us on our shit.
Mm.
And this is really important because what I noticed with my sponsors was that they could just call it. They could see, and they could see when I was my lens of focus was out of focus. And the next thing is which everybody oftentimes hears about through AA is these circles. And the circles are something that transcends 12-step recovery. It's ancient. And I just want to speak to the power of the circle because when we come into communion, I call it communion because we're coming into connection together in this space. And we're learning about how to share with each other and how to listen to each other. And this miracle or in synchronicity started to happen right away that I noticed was that there was these people that would share exactly what I needed to hear. And I was like, oh my God, like there's this miracle running through this circle. And it would happen consistently. And there was this realization and that, alone we can't, but together we can. And it's spoken of oftentimes in recovery. And so that that healing tool, which is us coming together to consciously listen and to share with each other, is is so profound, and that has continued outside of the work that I did in recovery in men's circles as well. And working with conscious masculinity and how we understand at this time in life, how are we to live as men? And we learn from each other and we learn through sharing and listening. So it's a very powerful tool. So that was the second, what I would call pillar. The third pillar is the 12 steps. And the 12 steps, an exploration of it is really this understanding that um, I am unmanageable on my own. Where I've gotten to in my life, at this place of being at a bottom, is this state of complete unmanageability, and that I'm powerless over it because if I could have changed it, I would have changed it. And it takes, for me, I'll speak about myself. It took a lot of pain and suffering to get me to that place. Many people tried to help me, and I was unwilling to receive help. And until the pain got great enough, that willingness was created. And so that willingness then, provides a space of receptivity to hearing the message. And the message is that there's a power greater than ourselves. And for some that are atheists, that is the power of the circle. For others that believe in either a power greater than themselves or something that we are all connected to, which some choose to call God, then or source, then it is that we turn our will and lives over to the care of. And that begins what is a program of healing and recovery that is what I would define as creating spiritual fitness. And spiritual fitness is just like going to the gym. It's these principles, I'll share the last principle, which is service. Having a sponsor, which is working with an elder, having being sharing openly and listening, and having a spiritual guidance system in our lives that creates accountability, that allows us to review and more deeply understand ourselves, that allows us to support others. And yeah, the service component. The service component, I'll just say, it was likely the most profound, one of the most profound realizations of my life. And that is, and it's clearly stated, but not truly understood until practiced, which is that there's a saying, we keep what we have by giving it away. And I prefer to say that we find freedom through giving. And that is because the nature of addiction and the nature of the ego is self-centeredness. And to be able to be in a place of true happiness, I find that a lot of the greatest freedom that I've experienced has been through service. So I think that's I wanted to kind of give you a general summary, and I think that encapsulates it.
Great. Well, thank you for that general summary there. I think there's so much to unpack. And though I did know that, the AA meeting circles were very spiritually oriented, I appreciated their universal availability to everybody. I think they use the term you would know better than I, but we turn to the support of God, however we would define that term. They say things like that. What you shared there sounds to me very similar to a spiritual community, like say a monastery. You have the sponsor, which is the teachers, the guides, the guru, you could say, the circles, which is the community, the sangha, right? Um, it's clearly a very spiritual process, and all of my work that I've done with this spiritual stuff, I've never come across a single person that's come to the path unless they were at a point of suffering, at a rock bottom place. So some come through depression, mental illness, heartbreak, some through addiction, some through physical illness. There's something or the other. And so if we really boil it down, we're all not that much different. It seems to be there's these general themes. We suffer, we look for support, we come in community, and we relate. And then it, of course, turns into service in some way or another. So incredible, but I'm really happy that we can look at it through your experience. Going through some serious trauma as a young teenager, losing your mom. And so of course we see addiction doesn't come out of nowhere, right? It's associated with some pain. Um, so you have this non-dual experience with some incredible synchronicity. You described a burst of Kundalini, a sort of burst of this Kundalini rising or energy. Was there a specific moment where this took place?
That occurred as I see it now, that occurred in that restaurant when I was having that
Interesting.
experience, and then continued on in ways. Um, I've had several stages of awakening, some more related to like a large heart opening that was very blissful, and the occurrence of many new things coming into my life that were very nourishing. And you could say it's a chapter, but it was definitely associated with the opening of the heart. And then the Kundalini awakening itself, I think is yeah, it's a very mysterious, as you know, and powerful process that I think really, I'm just so grateful that your mission has shed so much light by really bringing together to speak about it, because you know the the mystery behind it creates the mystery behind it is tied also very deeply um, to mental health, and to our in Western society, uh, the Western materialistic worldview, that if you were to look at something like, say, for example, transpersonal psychology, which integrates the spiritual into psychology, then Kundalini has a place. And as such, spiritual emergence is not mental illness.
Yeah.
And this is something that is very, very challenging for both practitioners from a Western school of thought and individuals going through Kundalini, because many tests, I've had all kinds of tests, health tests, nothing shows that anything's wrong. And yet these, in a state of spiritual emergency, and we can dive a little bit more into, I can talk a little bit more about that as well. But for people that are going through Kundalini awakening in the dark, they're in this dark night of the soul, or they're dealing with extreme physical, psychological symptoms that can go on for years. And they see their doctors, and their doctors are like, what we can do for you is essentially either prescribe you a antipsychotic, or sometimes and I'm not saying that there isn't at times place for Western medicine. I really want to make that clear as well. This isn't poo-pooing on Western medicine, but it's speaking to the complexity.
Yeah.
And that's what is really important. And I think the more dialogue that we have about this, the more awareness that is created, the more that those two worlds will be bridged in a healthy way.
Right. Right. So let's go there. Talk to us about some of the difficult uh signs, you can say symptoms of your awakening experience, your spiritual emergency. Let's unpack this a little bit. What was that like for you? And of course, we can, in general, did you know that this was spiritual emergency? Well, what were you thinking when this was all happening to you?
So this is a diverse kind of story to tell. I'm going to jump ahead, just to give a little bit of context to my Kundalini awakening and how that occurred. So um, I started to really feel a call to plant medicines. And I had worked a lot. I had not worked with, actually. I had used psychedelics a lot in my youth, but not in a conscious manner. And after what was, I think, about a decade and a half of sobriety, I really felt this call to these medicines. And it was an interesting thing, because there are two worldviews. And I think what I was being called to uh, is in essence the earth traditions. And by the earth traditions, I mean traditions like the First Nation traditions and the South American traditions that are kind of termed shamanic. And um, during my recovery process, I was introduced by elders that were supporting me in my recovery to many of the First Nation traditions, including the Sweat Lodge and the Sacred Pipe and the Sacred Fire. And that was a that was a very important part of my reconnection to spirituality. And um, there was a calling there to move more deeply into those spaces. And it was in conflict in a lot of ways with my worldview regarding um, addiction and mind and mood altering substances, specifically within the 12-step programs, which is like there are no mind and mood altering substances. And um, I reached a point where I made the decision that I was going to go and do some of that work. And I did, and that opened up a new chapter of awakening and also awareness about the mystery and the power of working with a lot of these sacred plant teachers. And um, eventually, my Kundalini awakening would occur through ayahuasca.
Hmm.
And um, this also ties into a an interesting subject, which is spiritual and shamanic initiation. And this is a subject that I really feel also ties to to an individual's life path or to their experience or to how maybe the divine teaches them. So in my case, through my through my Kundalini awakening, I started to experience many um, first of all, the spirit world opened, and I was now integrated. And many people speak about this with Kundalini awakening, where I became clairaudient overnight. And that was extremely difficult because what it felt like to me was I was hearing all of these things. And this sounds just, talk to a normal person, they're like, yeah, that's because you have a mental health issue and you damaged yourself with ayahuasca. And the that's not the context or the understanding within the traditions, but existing in Western society and beginning to move through this path of initiation, I started to learn about discernment in the spiritual realms. And that started with clairaudience, and it was quite scary because I could hear things, and my logical process for this was to do my best to understand what is the relationship between the things that I'm hearing and feeling. And yeah, and that right away started to I didn't realize I'd went through a Kundalini awakening at all. I had no idea that that's what was happening. Um, the process in the ceremony was quite a difficult one where I went through a death experience. And there was also during that time the what I would what I would call is a top down awakening, um, which I refer to as like the descent of grace. It was like this force that came down through me and ignited my Kundalini. And um, when I returned from the ceremony, um, I knew that something drastic had changed, and the initiatory qualities of this they tie together the more yogic worldviews and the um not that yogic and shamanism, but I'm like a more classical kind of like South American or North American shamanic kind of view together, because the shamanic initiations that I experienced, they were in relationship to the purification of the lower chakras. And so as a result, as the lower chakras were going through this deep purification process, all of these extremely fearful experiences were happening, but I was being tested both in the dream time and in my day-to-day processes. Because keep in mind, while this is going on, I'm a founder of a technology and gaming company, and I'm running a gaming studio with staff and while I'm experiencing all of this. And there's a great deal of mystery, and I literally was holding on for dear life. One of the first things that came to me through my ayahuasca ceremony was that the spirit of ayahuasca said you're going to be studying with tobacco, and tobacco will be a teacher. And I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but I was very, very keenly aware of the sacredness and use of tobacco in the North American traditions. And um, yeah, I could go into depth about what some of the experiences were that I went through with tobacco as both a vehicle for supporting the movement of Kundalini up through the heart space, And that occurred over about a year and a half period with very deep work that was combined with many shamanic initiations. And those had a flavor very similar to what you might imagine. So the elemental spirits and the animal spirits began to both come to me in dream time and to also come to me through actual physical encounters. And I started to learn about traditions through working with spirit. And um, I was provided with these opportunities to do very deep shadow work. And that work, a lot of that work involved facing terror and moving through darkness and allowing myself to learn to trust in the process that was underway. And so during this whole phase, which lasted about a year and a half, it was very fascinating because I was able to manage and work with clients at work and address my responsibilities at work. And at the same time, I was dealing with a lot like extreme paranormal difficult things that were going on in relationship to both Kundalini and the purification process and the initiations as I was describing. And um, yeah, do you have any questions on this so far? I've been going for a
Yeah.
little.
So you're going through this really far out experience and yet maintaining a worldly role as a, a business owner, right? So how are you navigating this? Are you speaking openly about this to anybody and everybody at all times? Is this very something that you keep to yourself and only speak to maybe your mentors or your close friends? Like what's going on there? Because this is like you described, it's like you're in two different worlds at the same time. How do you navigate this space?
So it was extremely challenging. And the the challenging aspects of this, I'll speak to, well, first I'll answer your question. How do I navigate it? I navigated it um by trust and with the support of several people that I knew had the ability to truly understand what was happening. And then there was consequences as well, and the consequences were that there is through these types of spiritual initiations and through Kundalini awakening, there is through the Western construct, it's like everything that I just shared sounds just like absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And and when in dialogue with people where an individual going through these types of experiences deeply yearns for understanding. They deeply yearn for someone to say, "Hey, like I know what you're going through is hellish, but we understand and we believe you and we trust you." And there was a few people that did, and then there was many that I just knew that I needed to not speak to these things, but I also had to really hold it together. And um, and what was fascinating about that first period was when I returned from ceremony, I was not able to sleep, and I could only sleep, I would say, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a night for well over a year. And the fires were just burning. It was like Kundalini was just fired up. And during that time, the experiences, I now came to understand that the way in which I was instructed by spirit to work with tobacco and the techniques and tools that I was using in order to in order to help to support to balance the energies within myself. Because after that stage of work was done, spiritual work was done, I it was left behind.
Hmm.
And it was notably concluded in a way that I understand had it had reached it had served its purpose. And this is an interesting thing, because the idea of these attachments to definitions, I find, is a very fascinating part of the Kundalini awakening process too. It's like, oh, I want to be a healer, or I want to be this or that. And when we have innate interest and willingness to pursue something, we do. But the Kundalini experience, in my experience, really asks for the surrender of a lot of that. And so, after several years of this very intense work of working through, for several hours in the middle of the night each night, while, going through many symptoms and experiences that really, they were of great concern, to my loved ones. And they were difficult for my business partners. It was overall a difficult situation. And um, when I finished that chapter, it was just to be left behind, and I moved on to another stage. And the next stage really was a very, very, very difficult stage that lasted for 2.5 years. And it was in relationship um, to psychic energy, and to when we hear the term highly sensitive person, um, or an empath, you know, I never personally resonated with these terms, but then through the Kundalini experience, I started to notice, like, I would walk out into an elevator, and all of a sudden, like, I could feel everybody that had been in the elevator. And then I would start to actually feel as if I was them. And I was literally wearing, like, their lips were my lips, and it was just this. And I began to experience these just absolutely extreme symptoms of kriyas that would result as the psychic energy entered my body, and my body would go into a state of overwhelm. And um, this became absolutely debilitating. And I'm not sure, I'm sure you actually have read Gobi Krishna's
A little
um,
bit, yeah.
So so it very much took on to the audience, talking about Gobi Krishna experienced a spiritual awakening. It was with an imbalance in one of the channels, which is in it was it Eater of Bengal? I think it was yeah, anyway, one of the fire channel. And as that occurred, he experienced many very, very difficult symptoms. And I began to experience those while simultaneously, and just for the audience, I highly advise that you do not do this. I I ruptured a disc in my lower back.
Mm.
And that combination of Kundalini and that disc injury was very, very difficult. And I experienced a lot of very challenging yeah, energies and experiences that greatly affected my health. And it got it it got really bad. It got to the point where family was taking care of me, where I was completely bedridden, where I couldn't walk for months. Um, it was a whole ordeal.
Wow. So You shared that when you were going through the intense, I guess, emotional purification periods in conjunction with working with the shamanic traditions while being a business owner, you shared that you got that through that with
Mhm.
trust, and you were tactful in navigating your relationships, sharing with the right people, not sharing with the wrong people. Very, very useful information because I know many people are like, how do I talk to people about this? And it takes some skill. But you mentioned trust. So now you rupture a disc. What about your trust here? Are you laying in bed, bedridden, saying, this is all part of my healing process. It's all going to work out. It's all going to be well. Where does your mind go? Where does your emotional state go? What's your relationship like with God, or however you would like to call it? Is there still trust there?
So to give you a gauge of the type of experience, I was, a kriya is an energetic is a blockage essentially being worked through in the energetic body. I was experiencing kriyas for 6 or 7 hours a day straight, like just unrelenting, and it was just combined with the all the symptoms from the disc injury, which was sciatica going down my legs, and I was not able to walk. It was so unmanageable that all I could do was just hold on. And the concept of the nature of God within these types of experiences is interesting because when the ego is faced with hopelessness and suffering outside of its capacity to handle, my experience is that we become a witness.
Hmm.
We just observe what is, and the body goes through it. The body screams, the body cries, the body begs for mercy, the body does um, prays and does all of these things. And then there is an observer as well. And I should speak also to at this time that the understanding of uh, the nature of the teacher and the master that really truly is teaching, which is which is divinity, is occurring during this time. And the sense of rightness is and was always present. The grief for the nature of my experience and through a certain lens, my own karma was very, very challenging,
Yeah.
very challenging. And, um, but the support of the teachers and specifically this sense of a master teacher that is teaching how to be was undeniable at
Mm.
all times. And one of the greatest teachings that you know, I'll just speak, the master communicated so clearly is silence.
Mm.
Through the shamanic training, through this training, the training it changed, and with the shamanic training, it was like all these tools that were very, pipes and drums and these types of classical shamanic tools. Then it moved completely into and stillness of the mind and sound. And the the replacement of external like plant medicines were they were replaced by music. And music was supported by the teacher spirits, including the animal spirits that would guide and support the activations and understanding of the place of music in the healing process as a vehicle for um, expansion, for as a calibration, as a calibrating tool of the nervous system, as a yeah, as a grounding tool, and as a soaring tool, you know. And then the stillness was beautiful because the stillness also was taught in a manner that related to rightness, which is that the feng shui also became very, very prominent in my awareness. I understood that just like in music, everything had a place and a sense of rightness in its place. And I began to very clearly understand how to honor a space in order to create a field of that of harmony. And that was also through the process of tending to space in that manner in stillness, which it's funny because really it's like what I'm talking about. It's very much temple living, you know?
Mm.
It's just it was done alone, guided by spirit. And I think, you know, this is a common experience for those of us that are going through awakening within the context of Western society. You know, I really appreciated when you shared about your parents just giving you the space, you know, to just do your healing. They stop bugging you. It was like it's like that type of thing where like somehow, even though it's gnarly, like it all is perfectly attended to, you know?
Yeah.
And mm,
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. You know, you're my favorite type of person. It's a person who sees the rightness through hell, through torture, through the fire, the internal fire that can burn for years. There's a deeper understanding of there's this rightness there. It's not a mistake, it's a process. And to me, when I say you're my favorite type of person, I describe a person like you as invincible. Anything can come through your system, and there's a knowing, even if it's just sort of in the background, just a glimmer, a pilot light of this still rightness is here. And that's where the trust comes in. Of course, this is right. You describe the witness. So early on in my process, I came across the work of Joan Shivar Pita Harrigan from Patanjali Kundalini Yoga Care. Excellent books. And in her book, she has a diagram which she calls the Restoration Project. And in that diagram, there's a depiction of a watchtower. And you're tasked with sitting in this watchtower as a river of pollution and toxicity just flows. You don't identify with it. You don't get in the river. You don't judge the river. You just sit in the watchtower as this river flows. And that river of toxicity and ugliness, trauma and pain from the past, it's still right. And we just observe and witness. And that is ultimately there are many techniques, many interesting, exciting ways that we can explore it. It boils down to these couple things here, like you said, the silence, the witness, knowing that it's all right. Brilliant stuff. So looking back at your key moment where, the synchronicity came about in the restaurant, the way that I look at synchronicity is an experience like what you had reveals to us what's happening in every moment. And so I'm curious about whether synchronicity has been a tool that you've used to further cultivate this sense of rightness and understanding and trust. Is it like a tool that you use to look for and justify why it's all working out, even when things are messed up? Um, Might be a bit of a confusing question there. Just maybe you can comment on synchronicity.
yeah, I don't find it a confusing question. I think synchronicity is a very important and prominent part of the awakening journey in its capacity to help us to realize the interconnectedness of all life and to provide a sense of true magic to life, which is like, holy shit, man. Like, I thought I was in this random like world, and guess what? Like, it's all as magical as I always dreamed it could be when I was a child.
Yeah.
that is that is an incredible realization. And the nature I have experienced of um, life is that it changes. And so, actually I'm just going to hold this up here because it's just like I'm propping this. So this is the I Ching,
Hmm.
and for this book, an oracle is such a tool and teacher for creating a sense of peace within the context of change. And that's really what the I Ching is about, it's about studying the nature of change. So to answer, to go back to what we were talking about synchronicity, in my experience, that was how things started. And then I went through processes where things really switched, like would flip on their head, and it would be like, reality would take on a very unpleasant synchronicities and um uh almost kind of taunting type of nature to these things. And that occurred, and is I think a part of our opportunity to be observers of what is happening, because there's a danger to always defining something to be a certain way and thinking that it will always be that way.
Right.
And and that is also why I referenced the I Ching, because it it was a for those out there that have really experienced um, a sense of loss of trust in their spiritual process as a result of their difficulties, be it with Kundalini, be it with addiction. The I Ching served in my life as a tool that helped me to recognize that um, that just by virtue of change, that's one thing we can always depend on,
Right.
and there is peace within that. And it also is a great teacher of the middle way and of being in the center where all things move around us. And um, and then also just the very practical aspects of one that I reference sometimes is like, if you go out to a really like stormy like sea area and you jump in the water, you're near some rocky cliffs, you're probably going to get smashed up against them. You know what I mean? Which is like, there's there's this aspect of the sometimes cold, hard realities of life, which are also spiritual, and um and our our opportunity to use discernment in all that we do. And yeah, that's
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah, change, impermanence within the past, 6 months or so, I've been really coming to understand Kundalini Shakti as impermanence, as this flow of impermanence. Um, it's been a very interesting refinement of what I understood to be this Kundalini force orchestrating these huge events in my life, even these huge inner experiences. But now I'm seeing it also as quite literally the tingling vibration that I can sense in the atoms in my hand. Like this is Kundalini and Shakti, that impermanence. And I've got another gentleman that I'll be having on the show, Byron Patchett, and he's a very experienced meditator, but a Kundalini awakening as well. But it's not the paradigm that he approaches his path from. Doesn't really speak about Kundalini per se, but I was talking to him briefly and he said, well, the only thing I trust in is impermanence. And I thought, like, I've never heard anybody express it that way, as if to personify change. as if it's something you can put your trust in. When things are difficult, you trust that it's not going to last. So I won't ramble on. I look forward to having him on the show, but right now we've got Aaron here. So
Thank
Aaron,
you.
you're you've been doing men's work as well, the divine masculine. I want to see what you have to share about that a little bit. But first, I want to just recognize the divine feminine here and see if you have any thoughts about this. And I feel like taking a risk and getting a little vulnerable here, or inviting you to be vulnerable. But if you're not open, that's fine too. But I can relate a little bit because in my life, the divine feminine or the feminine in general, you could say, of course, it's all divine. Um, some of the earliest programming I received around the feminine was, of course, through my parents. My dad's mother died when he was 9 days old. And I remember when he first told me this, it was, I was stunned. I was a young kid, but very stunned. I couldn't believe it. And this was is significantly, programming me, there's this um, relationship with the divine feminine, and he was sharing his pain. So in your story here, you expressed, similar ordeals in your life. In my life, my path was very much to do with relationships, with heartbreak, with abandonment, betrayal, with romantic partners, women. And this brought me to self-love. So in your story, you describe, of course, your mother passes away. This triggers some difficult pain in your life. Next, you mentioned, well, not next, but you mentioned, of course, Kundalini Shakti, which is the goddess, the divine feminist, depicted as that force in some paradigms. Ayahuasca, they describe as, this, I believe, this grandmother energy of the jungle. And then you also described music as being a great healing tool in your life. Music, the muse, the feminine, the goddess. Now you're doing this work as, the divine masculine facilitator and coach, supporting men's circles. What can you say about, this relationship with the divine feminine? Where does that fit in for you? Is anything that I'm sharing to you, how does that feel for you? This rediscovery and healing of the relationship with the feminine.
It's very, very powerful, Brent. And I think, we all are influenced by our relationship with our parents. And when we think of the Hermetic principle as above, so below, it's also as below, so above.
Mm,
And so what's interesting to think about that is our relationship with our parents in our spiritual awakening process has great influence. And it's in relationship to this principle. So the dynamics and the resolution of the trauma and the coming into right relation and the healing of the divine masculine and feminine is all of our work. And when I talk about conscious masculinity, conscious masculinity is the integration of the divine masculine and feminine within ourselves in order to be in true harmony with ourselves and with in right relation with others. And um yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can talk about this. One of them is through the concept of the yin yang, and the concept of, you describe music as the divine
muse.
feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah, muse. And Saraswati, and like this movement of creative life force energy, and the void or silence, the stillness, as the masculine. And this can be flipped on its head in different ways too. There's also, it can be reversed as well. But through this lens of this duality of medicines,
Mm.
which is it comes in, it's stillness and movement and um, void space and creation. And um, this is a process of I think our own healing through an ongoing eternal learning that just keeps on. It's creative and it's expressive and it keeps on growing. But as we come into alignment with some of these medicines and we do the work, the Kundalini process is, many people describe past life experiences. Many people describe the healing of their ancestral lines. And um, this can be debated because what is actually 100% certain, but through the experience of individuals that experience these miraculous memories and purifications of things related to their ancestral line, there's a knowingness within ourselves that we are doing that work and
Mhm.
that work is creating that sacred harmony. Um, and yeah, and so uh, I deeply honor the divine masculine and the divine feminine, um, and I just appreciate the myriad of ways that this manifests, including all the medicines which we're speaking about, which are so crucial to our healing and awakening process. Yeah.
Yeah. Great, great. Well, thank you. Yeah, it ultimately boils down to these two fundamental medicines, like you call it, medicines, movement, stillness. It's medicine ultimately, and different types of medicine to be used at different times, and brilliant stuff there, brilliant stuff. So today, take us through. We've got a bit more time here. Take us through now. Of course, I'm assuming that you're not bedridden anymore. You're feeling
I'm not.
confident and able to now support others. You've been called to support others and serve. How does your sort of bouncing back or reintegration back into the world look like after going through this difficult, dark time? Does it happen overnight in a flash and a miracle? Is it gradual? What does that look like for you? And then we'll talk a little bit about the direction of your work now that you've gone through this, pretty significant transformation.
There is there is always, like I was speaking about with discernment, there is always a necessity in my own experience to assess what is um, the next best right step. And then also understanding that I'm not who I was any
Right.
longer. And that the nature of the reality and the experience that I live within is different than the one prior to Kundalini awakening. And as such, the way that I move now with life is different. And I'm always reminded that I can trust my experience, as we talked about earlier, and also to continue to strive for gentleness and enjoyment and service and to one of the things that Kundalini really has offered me is a simplification process. You know, part of the journey with Kundalini was the collapse of my dreams.
Mm,
And as I mentioned, I had a company. I was working on technologies and things that were all of service and these very big dreams, working with amazing people doing amazing things. And there was a natural process of um, surrender into the necessity to let that go.
right.
And now the wheel keeps turning, right? So, will that emerge in a brand new, beautiful way? I'm sure it will. I've done, my mission um, prior to Kundalini and throughout the Kundalini processes as well was the integration of um, what I would say is technologies that are in support of the sacred,
Mm,
the union of practices and technologies to create um, solutions to support spiritual development and growth. and to in support of human beings being a solution at this time on the planet. And so that translates into education, that translates into holistic wellness, and that translates into the creative arts. And so those are the three areas that my focus has been on. And I've had the pleasure of working with amazing companies that have, that are doing fantastic work in this space, companies like HeartMath, and I can talk a little bit about some of the projects and things that I've worked on in relationship to this. But at this time, I have that whole background. And I also, have for the duration of, since my own recovery, been supporting people in a coaching manner, and more recently with spiritual awakening. How these things all come together, I'm I'm really creating space because I see how opportunities, they come when they're meant to, and forcefully trying to create, um, I have to bring intention, but my intention is to serve through the gifts that I have to offer. And I'm much more fluid in the ways that I do that now than I was, um, in my younger years. And you know what, Brent, a big part of that, it was that a lot of my desire was rooted in my own insecurity and trauma.
Yeah.
And through the healing process and also just the maturing process, it's not that I don't have the aspirations to create and to serve in big ways. It's just that my sense of self doesn't depend on them any longer.
Right.
And and um yeah, I think that's
Great, great. Yeah, that'll speak to many people who are on this brink where they recognize this process is wrapping up. What next? And how? I think, like you're saying, we have to be very loose with our agenda of what this service may look like or what the next stages may look like. You look back at your prior experience, and I've actually been sharing a little bit about your story with people and recently because people say, Brent, I'm going through Kundalini awakening. I'm feeling like I'm ready to get back in the role. What do I do now? And I say, well, look at what are the themes that have been going on in your life? It's likely that those themes have been training in preparation for what you'll do now that you've, reached some sense of stability in your Kundalini process. And I was actually telling them about you and saying, I know this guy, Aaron, he was, dealing with addiction, then he was supporting people with addiction as a coach. He goes through Kundalini awakening. What do you think he's going to do? He's going to continue coaching and supporting from a new place and supporting people in a more broader sense. It's not that suddenly he's going to drop all of that and do something completely different. Different things may come about, but the foundation you laid as a coach, as somebody who's done the work on themselves as a healer, of course, it's going to continue. And then so I invite people out there to look, what are the themes in your life? Have you been a speaker? Have you been a singer? Have you been a writer, an artist? Have you been somebody who's just open-hearted and caring and there to support people emotionally? Those themes probably are going to just get amplified and translate over once this process reaches a certain point where you're pushed back into the world. But like Aaron, like you're saying, our agenda and our control, that grip, it just gets very loose and it's no longer fueled by insecurity. It's just fueled by let's see where the flow takes us. And it's very, very inspiring. So with that said, how can people connect with you if they'd like to go deeper with you, find out a little bit more about you, your work, maybe meet with you for some coaching, for some support? Where can they go?
I'll share all my info with you, Brent, and maybe we can put it in the video chat. And yeah, I would love to connect with people. The where I see my work really going at this time in the coaching capacity, I'm still supporting people with addiction. I'm also supporting people with Kundalini awakening, and then I'm supporting conscious individuals in business as well, because I have this diverse set of skills that um, initially I was just trying to pick a specific one thing, and I realized, that that's not what my heart wants, and that's not what my experience has offered. And so there's, on my website, I'll share more about that, and anybody that feels, that that it would be important for them to work with me, I look forward to connecting with them.
Great, great. So all of the links to connect with Aaron are in the description. You can connect with him, follow up with him. It's been a great conversation, and I just want to acknowledge that I'm sure we've overlooked quite a bit here. It seems like you've gone through a lot of interesting things, a lot of wisdom has come out. And if we had all the time in the world, I would love to just sit with you and go through every little last thing because you got so much interesting things to share in such an, first really, really clear way. So I'm hoping that maybe in the future we can jump on another conversation, see where it goes. But Aaron, thank you so much for sharing so openly and clearly with us about the challenges you faced, solutions you found, and I hope that our audience can reach out and connect with you and benefit from some of the other things you have to offer. Thanks for joining
Brent,
us today.
it's been an absolute pleasure, man. I just want to again acknowledge the work that you're doing, how important it is at this time, and I look forward to another conversation. So let's definitely do that when it's in alignment. And thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And to our listeners out there, thank you so much for all the support and encouragement and the shares and all the engagement. We really appreciate you. So thanks for hanging out with Aaron and I today.
And to anybody out there that is really, really struggling, just know that you are not alone. That we are here, and there is support. So,
Yeah. Amen. Amen. What a great note to wrap up on. So like that, until next time, much love and
much
peace.
peace.